This is Smedley Prime. I haven't done one of these in a while, but today I will be extensively reviewing for a class this comic, given the movie coming out soon, and this one, and to a lesser degree that one, because there's a little bit of a mention in there that reminded me of the other day. So we open up with Supergirl. You have a dude and another dude, they're dueling. It's Krem, and he's the guy that stabs dude one, walks away. And little bits of yellow narration from a girl named Ruth, who, when I first read this for my class, I could have sworn was basically Mormon, because she mentions somewhere over here 6 brothers and her, which makes 7 kids, and they are 11 short of the TLC reality show with 19 kids and counting. Skip a few pages. We go to a guy who looks like the dude from Robert Kirkman's Skinbreaker, rubbing a sword in Supergirl's face, and she's of course drunk because Tom King thinks he's funny, between referencing Red Sonja in the bar and Carol Danvers in the 80s and 90s when she had a drinking problem, like my other brother Garrett's favorite song. And this one girl I hung out with for a weekend once, I told her that she had a drinking water problem because she spent 3 hours in a hot tub, and she was pretty dehydrated. She thought it was pretty funny when I told her she had a drinking water problem. But anyway, we go on, and she ends up getting upset and annoyed, and you have an epic fight, and Crypto looks on in wonder. Skipping a few pages, she's puking up all the drink, and Ruth is helping her out. And we go over a few more pages, and we have she has a spaceship like the movie. And then they introduce themselves when she's not busy drinking. And then while they're talking, Supergirl has a Bon Jovi moment because someone shoots an arrow through her heart. Crypto goes to the defense, and it turns out it's Krem, and he does a bit of an old Yeller tease, except like in the movie she's pretty worried about him, but he's not gonna die or something. Then more dudes pop out and ambush them. Skip a few more pages, and Ruth experiences what most people do on an airplane with cramped seating. Oh yeah, and Supergirl is sleepy. Got a spaceship transport like the one episode of the Boba Fett show with Mandalorian, where a kid is kind of looking at him funny. Then we wind up on a bar. They wind up in a bar where this one alien dude is talking about Superman putting 2 of his brothers, as you can kind of tell, in the Phantom Zone. And the naming conventions remind me of when I was in high school. I wrote a different kind of scene, where this couple is watching a shootout, and it's a guy, is alien dude and an alien girl, and they had funny names, so it's kind of interesting that Tom King kind of swiped from me. And you get a bar fight. Skip a few pages. Red pill, because not like the Matrix necessarily, but more so with a reference to the time that in the New 52 Supergirl was a Red Lantern. That's what I'd like to think. This is an Easter egg kind of thing. Skip a few pages. Poor Crypto not feeling too good. Then we transition to, I think it's a security guy, and he's indifferent to their plight, stacking up a house of cards. And they're trying to appeal to him and asking about security, and then Supergirl gets annoyed and blows the house of cards in his face. We transition again to a hotel. He's talking about off-worlders with blue and purple. Purples, of course, are... hang on. A different category, I think, but basically, I think maybe natives. The point I was also going to say was that when I first read this section, it reminded me of Christopher Reeve when he did another movie in between Superman 1 and 2 with Jane Seymour, where they're in love. It's called Summer in Time. There's a scene where he checks into a hotel and then he bumps into her, and it's interesting. But I was going to say also, the blues and the purples, which... Hang on. Yeah, everyone is blue like the I'm blue, body, bee-dee-dee-ba. But anyway, hold on. Yeah, more blues and purples. I was telling my teacher that both my brothers one time were texting each other about the Bloods and the Crips and the restaurant discrimination, which the waitress here talks about making fun of Krypton. Reminded me of the one comic John Lewis wrote called March, which is based on his real life experience with the Civil Rights March and all of the activism therein that got the right to vote and a lot of other stuff. I had a professor, I should say, when I was at MTSU. He had a copy, which is how I learned about it, where he brought it in a plastic bag, and he was saying, this is my friend. He's inspired me to share this with everybody. And then when I took this class, I finally got to read it, and I thought it was pretty cool because John Lewis was big into chickens, kind of like Cyberfrog, except he was more inclined, like Stitch, to hang out with chickens more so than just eating them. Skip a few pages. The security guard tries to beat her up and then tries to shoot her. You have Krem in prison and all of these atrocities he's committing. A reflection. I'm gonna skip a few pages to poor little alien. I think this little dude probably inspired Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni to do Grogu. And so you have her cradling the little dude in his arms, like the way that Mando often does. There's more pages. Supergirl's in pretty bad shape, so Ruthie takes the sword, and you have a big giant dinosaur. Who initially seems threatening. Kind of off and on fighting with them. When you have coffee withdrawals. And then there's another dinosaur. If I remember correctly, having to flip back. Hang on. Oh, yeah, here we go. That's right, I remember now. Oh. They sent him in Toast Crunch, the poor green dinosaur. And also, kind of like the little alien in Galaxy Quest that's weaker and smaller that Sigourney Weaver points out. They don't treat him very well when Tim Allen and all the rest of them are grabbing the super rock to power the spaceship. Yeah. Skip a few pages. Again. It's Krem again. And Supergirl's upset about Crypto. And you get Comet, the horse. And he flies in and helps her out. And fly in. Then we get flashbacks to Supergirl's parents and the destruction of Krypton, which Reeves' movie and even Corn Sweats and yeah, even Cavill's kind of glosses over. But the Helen Slater one and the Millie Alcock one, which is the one coming out, will both. One has covered it and the other will cover more. I think next month. So you get the hammer and the decline as you go. Skip a few pages. Comet and Ruth decide to share some kind of apple, space apple. Which reminded me of the time that my parents and I watched Frozen and my dad was losing his mind because of the Kristoff dude, and I think the reindeer were sharing a carrot. And my dad said ew, and it was pretty funny. And it was a giant pirate ship like the Reavers in Firefly. Ruth has Krem tied to a tree. He's considering whether or not to execute him. She's talking to Comet the entire time about it. Quite a dilemma. You have Supergirl attacking the ship. More dialogue. More battle. So you have a bit of a contrast going. For a while. And then more and more and more. Goes on and on and on, and then she unties him and starts to fight him over the sword. And then Supergirl's still struggling. It goes on and on like Journey. And on. And then Supergirl comes back with Comet the horse, but he's human, and she explains that he got a spell, perhaps a curse. Then Supergirl takes up the sword. And then you think she's going to kill him, but then it switches over. And she's still trying to decide. And then it skips forward in time. She has a different costume. And Doggo's Crypto's feeling better. And Ruthie, the Mormon girl, is older. And then we have a Phantom Zone mention. A demonstration more so than Superman 2. Because in Superman 2, when they have Zod and then the other two generals, they get hit by the rocket, and then they pop out. This time, she just flings him out, and he's an old man. And I think at one point she cut his fingers. Yeah, she cut his fingers off. Supergirl cut his fingers off, which led me to wonder if he was getting a mechanical hand like your Luke Skywalkers of the world. And he's begging and begging, and then finally, Ruthie does like that Civil War dude, except I think it's more fatal. The dude in Congress that beat up the old guy with the cane, the other guy with the cane, because he was upset. Same thing here, except I think a tad more lethal. And then we have Supergirl walking away. And my sincere belief is that Lobo will be, given the trailer, included in the fight with the pirates. Given the Superman 90s animated series episode, Main Man, where he is making a deal with an alien collector to sell out Superman because he's the last of his people, and then he accidentally admits to the alien dude that Lobo is the last of his people. So they end up teaming up and breaking out. And the notion of it reminds me of a David Tennant Doctor Who era novel called The Last Dodo, where he admits he's the last Time Lord, independently of the Master, and Martha has to help break him out. And then also, Krem will look like Pinhead from Hellraiser, more so than the redhead bearded guy. And David Cornsweet will pop up like the end of Mariko Tamaki's Supergirl 2017-ish miniseries, where Kara meets Superman for the first time. So I'm saying, given the trailer where he's talking to her on the holo monitor, I would imagine that he'll pop up at the end and try to help her out. But that is pretty much it. Compared to his Batman run, where he almost had Catwoman marry him and then leave him at the altar and killed Alfred with Bane, I prefer this as relatively standalone. But that's because I think that Tom King is a horrible, like what Meyer had talked about with, he's horrible with male characters. And he tries to turn them all into his mommy wife fetish, which is very off-putting, because if I wanted a serious, the only relationship that he's really never done that with thankfully, is Superman and Lois Lane. But either way, I'm just sick of his mommy wife fetish. I get it, he was in the CIA, you gotta move on. Then we have the big bad Alan Moore comic that they've made, both a ridiculous HBO series and Doomsday Clock continuation, where Dr. Manhattan meets Superman. Rorschach Jr. punches Joker in the face, and Batman reads off Walter Kovac, the OG Rorschach, his journal, and learns about everything that Veidt does, which is covered in here way later with almost no context. So this one is a little tricky because it's pretty gross here and there, and I wonder sometimes what went into Alan Moore's head when he was writing this. But you have the cheeky smile, except unlike my grandmother's smiley face, there's blood on it. And we open up with an uncloaked or unmasked Rorschach with the end is near sign. His comedian had been red rummed, and it's pretty crazy. But he and a couple detectives separately, of course, are figuring out what happened and how dude could have fallen out the window. And so here he is, Rorschach, popping in, going through everything, like the movie. And then we switch over to Daniel and Hollis. It's pretty dialogue heavy. My favorite part, though, has always been where he lets him in his, he breaks in and he's eating the can of beans because, human bean juice. And he's very sad because he's retired and he keeps the costume in the closet as a reminder. Let's see, hang on, skip a few pages. I think this is quite a lot. We then move on, after he's questioned people in the bar, to an interview with Vite. And Rorschach believes that somebody's out to get everybody. And then we move on to Dr. Manhattan and Silk Spectre, but she prefers the name that her mom gave her. Lori. Yeah, Lori. And it is here, but not in the movie. The notion of a moral lapse, because Rorschach, both in this and in the movie, looks up to the comedian, but obviously Laurie ain't big on him. So, despite all of his pleas and all of his discussion, Rorschach gets popped out of the room. And then you have a dinner date. And in the movie, it's a little more, they're more jokey than they are here. And then they have the smiley button. And skipping over the Jonathan Hickman style blather pages, we move on to the next one. And they have the whole funeral going. And Laurie pops in to talk to her mom. Trying to get my notes mixed up here. The movie, though, has the funeral contrasted with the photography and the abuse that the comedian put her through, which, to be fairly honest, is pretty graphic. But yeah, you can kind of tell the other dude wasn't too happy about it. You have the meeting where Dr. Manhattan at least had the decency to wear more clothes than he does now. Dig around for a few pages. Then we have Vietnam era with the comedian, and he's questioning Dr. Manhattan's sense of morality. He doesn't own up to the poor Vietnamese lady having his kid, and so yeah, it's not nice. And then we have a bit of riot control, which is a little bit more elaborated in the movie, where Patrick Wilson as Night Owl Daniel, he wonders what happened to their sense of morality, and what they're doing and what they're about. And so it goes on to Rorschach visiting the Moloch dude. And my favorite part of the whole thing is... Hold on. Oh yeah, enemies 40 years. Why should he visit you? Because it just sounded funny the first time I saw that. Like something Batman would say. Which is funny because Rorschach was made fun of by The Question in an 80s comic, I think a little bit after this, with the fighting style and the mask. And Night Owl's very Batman. And so, skipping a few pages, Rorschach has the whole monologue about the comedian's death, more Hickman-style blathering. And then, my contention with the comic and with the movie is that this kid is reading a pirate comic that keeps interrupting the flow of the story. I understand the parallel. I do. It's just really annoying sometimes. But then we have Laurie in Manhattan again. And she walks out on him. And that's his ex-wife, which has kind of made me wonder a little bit about my friend and her sister, because there are times where they kind of bounce off each other, and it reminds me of Superman 4 with Lois Lane and the Lucy girl. And so the entire scene you have Superman, and then you have him switch to Clark Kent, and he's bouncing between them and he can't decide which one he's better with. Skip a few pages. You have the scene where he breaks down and he gets upset because they're questioning him about cancer. And it's crazy because in the movie he ends up, I think, just losing his mind and leaving. And then he opts to go to Mars to get away from the people, as nuclear concerns with President Nixon are worrying him. And so he, in true meme fashion, sits and he waits. And a lot of people, like one of my peers has pointed out, there's always something funny that people say here, and so there you go. This chapter, you get pretty much the whole backstory of, he was a scientist and his grandfather worked on watches and clocks, and then the accident happens and he goes boom, and then he's back to, I don't know, now he's his new form. And he meets JFK. And JFK's successor. Then we have a mention of the Keene Act, which Rorschach has never been big on. And in point of fact, the notion of the monologue in the beginning of the movie, he talks about he wasn't ecstatic about following the law, and all the news reporters are poking fun at how that he's a wanted fugitive for not complying. And then we move on to the palace on Mars, which comes in handy later. Then the next one we have Rorschach again visiting Moloch with a gun. And my other favorite part, which is very Deadpool, is the gun with no license. And so I think Alan Moore was poking fun at the NRA at the time with this. And he stuffs him in the fridge. There's more pirate blather. And then we have Vite, and he's taking a tour, and then suddenly he gets attacked. And then the poison pill. Yeah, poison capsulin it reminded me a lot of Dune, more so with the book my dad was reading and the Lynch movie, David Lynch. Because the problem I have with the new one is that I almost fell asleep trying to watch it. Plus, Timothy Chalamet just isn't that good or convincing an actor, honestly. Then have a bit of Rorschach going on and on and on. And then he gets framed and gets into a big bad fight with the cops. And then he gets arrested and demasked. And so it's off to prison he goes. And in prison he has a one-on-one heart-to-heart with the counselor dude whose son ends up, as I mentioned before, taking his mask and being inspired because he was told that they were buddies, even though they're just working to, or I mean, one of them is really trying to be nicer to the other. And so you have the flashback, which is pretty inappropriate, to his mom and discussion of why he doesn't like her. And then you have another flashback where he's beating up two bullies. And then it takes a minute to have the counselor talk to his wife. And he's more interested in his job than he is with talking to her. And then we have the origin of the face mask with the dress. And then the poor lady doesn't really end up in good shape. And then go on and on and on with the dialogue. The prison scene here in the movie, he says, "You guys don't get it. I'm not stuck in here with you. You're stuck in here with me," which the counselor in one prior panel was quoting it, but in the movie it's more elaborated, and then he ends up beating up all the guys that want to kill him. While it is that Daniel and Lori decide to break him out, but that's a little bit later from now. But yeah, this dude's caught up in his job. And you have flashbacks to when they were all together and hanging out and fighting bad guys. And then we have the mention and panel of Doggo not in great shape, because the Doggo was used by a dude to cover up the disappearance of a little girl. Though in the movie, he uses the axe on the other dudes, on the same dude as he does the dogs. But in the comic here, let's just say it's the 70s song Burn Baby Burn. Disco Inferno, that one. Yeah, because in the movie, the reason they changed it up from this to the axe chopping is because they didn't want to rip off Saw. But my contention with this panel is that this is also a meme. It's just not as popular as Manhattan on Mars. So we get more of the husband and wife committal issues. Then we have Lori and Daniel playing dress up and renovating the saucer. And Snyder took the time out of his day in the movie. And he had them get friendly. And there you go. He had the Hallelujah song. Yeah. The entire time they're hanging out in the spaceship. Then the most interesting thing in the movie director's cut that they kind of touch on here, but it's inverse in the movie where they break Rorschach out first before this scene. They're talking on the phone, Laurie's mom and Hollis, and reminiscing about the good old days, and the kids are excited for trick-or-treat. And then he gets a knock on the door. No, hold on, wait, that's the pirate stuff. Hold on. Yeah, is Rorschach in prison again? They're chatting things up. They end up opting to take the spaceship saucer. And then they break him out. After, of course, if I remember correctly, he takes a bathroom break, and then he goes with them. They're arguing. Then you have Manhattan offering to take her to have a dialogue. And if I remember correctly, hold on. There's a lot that's going on. I'm sure Snyder felt the same way. Hold on. Yeah, okay, the breakout, bathroom break. And then Daniel's getting in the middle of the two of them talking, so he takes her to Mars. And then in the movie, Rorschach just takes his costume out of a box. It's confiscated stuff, but in this, at some point, they have a storage center where he ends up taking the spare costume and putting it together. And then, yeah, here we go. So in the movie, it's 3 random dudes, thugs, that all have the matching costumes. And they break into his house, and then they beat him up, and they kill him with the trophy, which is really sad, because between the slow motion and the dude being older, and he's kind of helpless, but he's living his glory days in the few minutes before he dies. It is actually really sad. So, there you go. And the kids, well, the movie doesn't really touch on the kids' reaction, but the comic here does, which I kind of appreciate. Then we skip to Laurie can't breathe, and so Manhattan gives her some air, because he's been so long by himself he forgets how things work. And so they have a lengthy discussion about her family issues, and her mom married a different dude that she doesn't really appreciate. And so it goes on and on for a while, and she talks about the meaning of life. And then in the movie they hang out, but in this, apparently he offered her a cigarette. And then there's a hint toward something crazy about the 3 of them. Oops. Uh-oh. Yeah, so she has a heart-to-heart with the comedian. And then it's revealed that comedian is her dad, which obviously upsets her. So Manhattan tries to reassure her that it's not nearly as bad as she thinks. And then they end up going back to Earth at some point. We have Nixon and the nuclear concerns. Further Rorschach and Daniel adventures. And whereas in the movie he just takes the box of clothes and gets back together all the pieces and is ready to go, he stops by here to go through, and he meets his neighbor who doesn't treat her very highly. She doesn't treat him very highly, and so he doesn't treat her very highly either. And the kids are shocked to learn what he let slip. And then a little bit later, he has his costume ready to go. Invites Scott the monitors. And so, hang on. Oh yeah, and then in the movie, with the bar questioning, Daniel is quite upset by the lady reporting about what happened to Hollis, and so he ends up beating up almost to the point of death one of the thugs associates, and he's very highly upset about Hollis being murdered. Then they blast off in the saucer. They're figuring stuff out and digging around. And in the movie, I was gonna say, I noticed that Daniel tries to figure out what the password is, and he looks at a book that says Ramses II, so that's how he logs in. And so once they get in and they figure out what the files are all about, they decide to go find Vite. And then Rorschach saves his journal for whoever might happen to care, which is how it ends up in the publishing office. It's off to Antarctica. We get a snowy, plump outfit. Alexander the Great gets a mention here, but doesn't in the comic. I mean, in the movie. Have him doing an epic talk for a while. There's his cat. And then they find him at his dinner table. Though in the movie, they end up fighting next to the holo monitor. To the monitors. And then, instead of hitting him with the bowl like he does here, he throws a chair at him. And then he goes over the steps that he took as he's beating them up with the syndrome level plan, where he admitted he killed Blake, the comedian, and then he framed Dr. Manhattan. And it goes on and on and on for a while. and then something crazy's going on. It's really bloody nasty. It looks kind of like the 5-year gap in Infinity War. And it's a big octopus instead of Thanos. And then Dr. Manhattan discovers what's going on. Laurie is horrified and upset. And then more dialogue. And in the movie, they pop up in the room, but Manhattan ends up leaving her in the ice and the snow. No, well, I should say in the movie, they both pop in and they're talking to everybody, but in this comic, he just leaves her out in the snow. It makes her very upset. And then he goes through the thingy, and he and the cat don't quite end up in great shape, like in the movie too. She tries to shoot him, and then he beats her up, and then Daniel tries to defend her, and he gets made fun of. Manhattan comes back. He's not very happy about the whole thing, and so Light, in response, further reveals more and more. And then in the movie, I prefer the notion of Daniel being more sympathetic by agreeing more so with Rorschach and not going along with everybody else here with the peer pressure. But Rorschach sticks to his guns. And what gets me about this is that whereas Daniel is far more interested in sticking with Silk Spectre here and putting his friendship with Rorschach aside, in the movie he follows every step of the way to the outside where Manhattan and Rorschach are outside, and Rorschach dares Manhattan to disappear him. He does. But what's interesting is that in the movie, while the hat is floating in the air, Daniel is shocked and upset and crying and takes his mask off. And then he gets fed up with Fight. And, Daniel gets upset and fed up with Vite and decides to just hop back in the saucer with Laurie and leave Vite to his machinations while Manhattan goes away. And then in the movie, you have Daniel and Laurie, except they don't have blonde hair. They keep to their brown hair, arguably. And they do visit her mom. And then more so here than in the movie, she's still kind of upset about Comedian. And then, like in the movie, they're trying to figure out a filler story to go with, and they end up running with Rorschach's journal, and that's pretty much how it ends. But with the hold on. Yeah, this is all over the place. Continued fascination with sequels and requels to this, I would say. The other reason I think I like Doomsday Clock better than the HBO show is that Vite and Manhattan and the Rorschach Jr. go to the main DC universe where Manhattan meets Superman, and he realizes the shortcomings that Alan Moore gave him when it comes to morality. And like in this comic here, Far Sector, you have other big name Green Lanterns Guy Gardner, except instead of Jon Stewart and Doomsday Clock, it's Hal Jordan and Jessica Cruz, because Jessica Cruz is the trainee. And there is no Kyle Rayner either, but I was going to say, I do think it was interesting that my teacher had us read all 3 of these DC comics for class, because not only is Millie Alcock with Supergirl getting a movie, but Aaron's Pierre is going to be Jon Stewart hanging out with Hal Jordan in the Lanterns TV show, because James Gunn wants, probably more than Damian Lindelof, for people to be excited by the notion of Jon Stewart hanging out with David Cornsweet Superman. And so that's pretty much it.